Joan Crawford was one of the brightest stars of that era, a legend who built her entire identity on power, beauty, and ambition. But even she carried secrets that could have destroyed everything she achieved. And one of those secrets was about love, a love she could never openly claim. Joan Crawford was not just an actress, she was a force of nature. Born into poverty, abandoned by her father, and raised in chaos, she climbed her way into Hollywood through sheer will. She reinvented herself again and again, never allowing anyone to see her weakness. But in private, Joan was not just the perfect star. She was a woman who longed to be understood, desired, and truly seen. Her rise to fame was defined by fierce competition and survival. Hollywood in the 1930s and 1940s was ruthless. Studios controlled everything: contracts, public appearances, even personal relationships. If you didn't follow their rules, you were replaced without hesitation. For a woman like Joan, who dreamed of eternal stardom, fitting into that system was the only way to survive. But there was something that Hollywood feared more than scandal: difference. At a time when even rumors of same-sex relationships could destroy a career, stars were expected to date men, marry men, and smile for the cameras. Anything outside of that was buried in silence. And so, Joan Crawford learned very young to hide. That doesn't mean she didn't take risks. Joan was bold, and she was drawn to people who were just as powerful. She had many relationships with men, some real and some for publicity. But there were whispers, quiet stories shared in private circles, about her secret liaisons with women. Studio insiders claimed Joan's curiosity was not just rumor, it was real. One name kept resurfacing in those circles. A woman just as captivating, just as magnetic, and just as dangerous to be linked with, a fellow actress in old Hollywood whose beauty and talent were undeniable. A woman many suspected Joan didn't just admire, she loved. But this wasn't just some fling. It was deeper. It was emotional. And it had to remain hidden from the world. Joan never spoke openly about this relationship during her peak years. She couldn't. The risk was too high. Careers had been destroyed over less. Actors were blacklisted, forced into marriages, or sent away to fix their image. Hollywood was a machine that demanded perfection and punished truth. Even powerful women like Joan were not safe. But Joan was no ordinary star. She had a side the public rarely saw, a rebellious, fearless, unapologetic side. She refused to let anyone control her completely. She may have followed the system, but she also bent it in her favor. She made sure no studio executive could fully own her. And that sense of control allowed her to live a life that was more complicated than anyone knew. Those close to her said Joan was intensely private about her personal affairs. She carefully separated her public persona from her private life. She made sure that anyone she trusted knew how to keep secrets. And the woman she secretly dated? She was equally calculated. Equally at risk. Their bond had to exist in stolen moments, hidden conversations, coded language, and quiet understanding. People today might wonder, was Joan truly in love with this woman, or was it just passion? The answer is probably both. Old Hollywood relationships were often tangled with power, desire, and survival. But Joan was not careless. She did not attach herself emotionally unless she felt something real. And the way insiders described the connection between her and this particular actress, it was intense. Intimate. Unspoken but undeniable. The pressure to appear normal was suffocating. Joan dated men publicly, married multiple times, and even adopted children to craft the image of the perfect Hollywood mother. Yet those closest to her noticed a pattern. Her deepest emotional bonds were often with women, loyal assistants, close friends, and at least one actress who meant more to her than the world could ever know. This was not just about sexuality. It was about freedom. For Joan, loving a woman was an act of defiance in a system determined to control her. It was about finding comfort in someone who understood the pain of being a woman in a man's world. Hollywood expected actresses to be beautiful, obedient, and replaceable. But Joan and this secret lover refused to be any of those things. The relationship wasn't without danger. Studio executives were always watching. Publicists monitored every move. The press was hungry for scandal. Even a wrong glance could lead to questions. So Joan played the game perfectly. She flirted with men in public, posed for photographs, and smiled through interviews. Meanwhile, her private truth lived in the shadows. Still, there were slip-ups. People noticed the closeness. Rumors spread quietly. Some thought it was jealousy. Others thought it was friendship. But a few knew. Hollywood insiders love secrets, but they also love silence. As long as Joan delivered hits and made the studio money, they looked the other way. Power protected her, until it didn't. Joan's life was layered with contradictions. She could be cold and tender, ruthless and vulnerable, controlling and desperate for love. The woman she secretly dated saw all of it. And that was what made their connection so dangerous. This actress didn't just see the star, she saw the woman underneath. And Joan could not afford to be seen too clearly. Why didn't Joan ever publicly admit it during her lifetime? Because she lived in an era where truth could destroy everything. She had fought too hard to climb to the top to watch it fall apart over love. So she buried it, like so many others in her time. But deep down, the memory stayed. It shaped her. It haunted her. In private conversations later in her life, Joan hinted at the truth. She never said the actress's name directly, but she admitted that she had loved a woman more than any man she had ever been with. She said the connection was emotional before it was physical. She said it made her feel alive. And she said it was the one relationship she could never speak about. When asked why not, she gave a heartbreaking answer: because people don't forgive women like us. That statement tells everything about the fear that ruled her world. Power did not protect her from judgment. Fame did not make her free. The most successful woman in Hollywood was still a prisoner of her own image. The actress she loved was also navigating her own challenges. She, too, had to hide. She, too, had to pretend. She became known to the world as glamorous and seductive, but she had her own secrets. And like Joan, she was scarred by the pressure of living a lie. Their bond was more than attraction, it was a refuge in a world that refused to accept them as they were. As time passed, their relationship changed. Hollywood moved forward, careers shifted, and they could no longer be as close. But the emotional impact stayed. Even after they went their separate ways, Joan kept a photograph of her in a drawer. She would look at it when she felt lonely. She would think about what could have been. And she would remind herself that for a brief moment, she felt truly understood. The truth is, Joan Crawford was never just one thing. She was not just a glamorous actress. She was not just a scandalous figure. She was a layered, complicated, passionate woman who lived multiple lives at once. And the fact that she admitted this secret, even in private, shows how deeply it mattered to her. What makes this story even more powerful is that Joan was not alone. Many stars in old Hollywood were forced to hide parts of themselves. LGBTQ+ relationships existed behind closed doors, protected by loyalty but crushed by fear. The world worshipped these stars without ever knowing who they really were. They were icons to the public, but strangers to themselves. Joan Crawford was brave in many ways, but this was the bravest part of her story. She dared to love someone society told her she should not. She risked her career, her reputation, and her legacy for a connection that felt real. And even though she could never say it out loud, her heart remembered. This chapter is not just about scandal. It's about truth. It's about the hidden cost of fame, the loneliness of living a double life, and the courage it takes to love in secret. Joan's story reminds us that behind every perfect image is a human being with emotions, fears, and desires that don't always fit the rules. And the most shocking part? The identity of that actress she loved, someone history remembers well, someone whose name still carries legendary status. Someone powerful, beautiful, and just as mysterious. Joan Crawford's life was filled with power, glamour, and carefully constructed illusions. But at the center of her most guarded secret was a woman the world admired just as much as her. Not just any woman. A fellow Hollywood star. A woman whose elegance, charm, and boldness made her unforgettable. The actress Joan secretly dated was rumored to be Greta Garbo, the enigmatic queen of mystery who refused to play by Hollywood's rules. Greta Garbo was unlike anyone in the industry. While most actresses were forced into public events and fake relationships, Garbo stayed private, distant, and unapologetically herself. She rarely gave interviews, avoided parties, and famously said, "I want to be alone." But those who knew her claimed she didn't want to be alone, she just didn't want to pretend. And that is exactly why Joan was drawn to her. In an industry built on lies, Greta Garbo was honest in her silence. She didn't explain herself. She didn't hide behind charm. She didn't beg for approval. She simply existed on her own terms. To Joan, who spent her entire life fighting to prove herself, Garbo represented freedom. And to Garbo, Joan represented passion, drive, and raw survival. They were opposites. But opposites often recognize each other more deeply than anyone else. Their connection began quietly. Hollywood insiders said they spent time together away from the spotlight, private dinners, long conversations, lingering glances at studio events. They admired each other openly, but no one truly understood how deep it went. Some thought it was just respect. Others felt there was more. And a few, the ones closest to them, knew they were treading dangerous territory. It wasn't just physical attraction. It was emotional safety. Joan, who often wore a mask of strength, could let her guard down around Garbo. And Garbo, who rarely let anyone close, allowed Joan into her world. They spoke about their fears, their pasts, and the suffocating pressure of being icons. In those moments, there were no cameras. No contracts. No roles. Just two women who understood what it meant to live under a microscope. Hollywood during that era was merciless toward same-sex relationships. Studios wrote morality clauses into contracts. If any actor was even rumored to be gay, they were forced into fake relationships or marriages. The press would destroy reputations without mercy. Careers ended overnight. Joan and Garbo both knew the stakes. They both knew that crossing that line could cost everything. And yet, they crossed it. Their relationship had to exist in whispers. They met in private homes, often with trusted friends acting as cover. They exchanged letters written in coded language. They sat in the back of dark cars when they had to go somewhere together. Sometimes, they pretended to dislike each other just to avoid suspicion. That was the heartbreaking reality of old Hollywood. Love had to look like distance. But the tension between them was impossible to ignore. At social events, people noticed the way they watched each other from across the room. There was a softness in Joan's eyes when she looked at Garbo, a rare glimpse of vulnerability she never showed anyone else. Garbo, who rarely smiled, seemed relaxed near Joan. Even in a room full of people, they made the world disappear. Some claimed Garbo was the one who kept the relationship calm and steady. Joan was intense, fiery, emotional. She loved with her whole being. Garbo was more reserved, thoughtful, careful. She never rushed. She took her time. She listened more than she spoke. That balance made their connection stronger. Joan brought energy. Garbo brought peace. They were equals. That was rare in Joan's life. Most men she dated tried to control her or feared her success. But Garbo was not intimidated. She was just as famous, just as powerful, and just as desired. They didn't compete, they understood. That mutual respect made their love dangerous, but irresistible. Still, even the deepest love was not enough to protect them from the outside world. The pressure became heavier. Studio executives started asking questions. Publicists warned Joan that spending too much time with Garbo could confuse the public. Gossip columnists hinted at unusual friendships. In an era of secrets, even a whisper could start a fire. Joan's career was built on glamour and accessibility. Garbo's career was built on mystery and distance. That difference made things harder. Joan had to constantly be in the public eye. Garbo could disappear when she wanted to. Joan feared that one wrong move could expose everything. Garbo feared that exposure would force her into a cage she could never escape from. Their love became a choice between survival and truth. And survival won. There was no dramatic breakup. No fight. Just a silent understanding. They both knew the world was not ready. They slowly drifted apart, not out of hate, but out of necessity. Joan threw herself back into work, marriage, and motherhood. Garbo withdrew further from the spotlight, eventually retiring young to protect her privacy. But even as their lives moved on, the memory stayed. Years later, Joan married men but never found lasting happiness. Her relationships with men were often volatile, controlling, or empty. But when she talked about the one person who truly understood me, she never said a name. She didn't have to. Those who knew her best already suspected. Garbo, on the other hand, never married. She had relationships with men and women, but she always kept her heart guarded. She lived simply, walked the streets without bodyguards, and refused interviews. When asked if she had ever been in love, she paused, then said quietly, there was someone. She never gave a name either. The silence between them says more than any public confession ever could. Hollywood historians and biographers have spent decades uncovering hidden relationships from that era. Many names have been linked to Joan: Barbara Stanwyck, Marlene Dietrich, Mercedes de Acosta. But Garbo stands alone. The emotional tone, the secrecy, the mutual respect, everything points back to her. Mercedes de Acosta, a famous writer who had relationships with both Joan and Garbo, once said, "Every woman wanted Joan. But only one woman ever truly had her heart. And that woman walked away before the world ever knew." Many believe she was referring to Garbo. There were also letters, rumored to exist, that hinted at their connection. Private notes that spoke of longing, admiration, and fear. These letters were never made public, but fragments were reportedly seen by biographers. Joan was terrified of these letters being exposed. She once admitted to burning personal correspondence to protect herself and others. If those letters were real, they held the key to her most private truth. In her final years, Joan became more reflective. The glamour faded. The spotlight dimmed. The power she once held slipped away. She spent more time alone, thinking about her past. In rare intimate conversations, she revealed glimpses of regret. She said she had sacrificed love for survival. She said she wished she had been braver. She never said the actress's name, but she said, "She was the only one who made me feel completely seen." That sentence broke the silence more than any confession ever could. It is easy to judge the past from the safety of the present. Today, stars can speak about who they love and still have careers. But in Joan's time, honesty was a weapon that could destroy everything. She didn't hide because she was ashamed. She hid because the world was cruel. And despite that cruelty, she still chose to love in the only way she could, quietly but deeply. Joan Crawford and Greta Garbo were two of the most powerful women in Hollywood history. They shaped cinema. They terrified studios. They inspired millions. But beneath all of that, they were just two human beings trying to find connection in a world built on illusion. Their story is not just about secrecy. It's about sacrifice. It's about longing. It's about the price of fame. It's about how even the strongest, most iconic women can be forced into silence by society's expectations. Joan left behind a legacy of brilliance, strength, and complexity. But the most human part of her story is the one she could never tell. The love she hid. The woman she adored. The truth she carried to her grave. And yet, in subtle ways, she did admit it. Not loudly, not publicly, but honestly. She acknowledged loving a woman more deeply than any man. She acknowledged how that relationship shaped her. She acknowledged the cost of hiding. That was her confession. Greta Garbo once said, "There are some things the world should never touch." Perhaps their love was one of those things. Protected. Untold. Sacred. But today, we can speak it. We can honor it. We can finally see Joan Crawford not just as a star, but as a woman who dared to love in a time when love could destroy you. And now the world is ready to hear the truth she never could say out loud. Joan Crawford secretly dated Greta Garbo, the legendary actress she could never publicly claim, but could never forget.